doing?
Good. How are you guys?
Hey, doing
Good,
great, doing
good.
great. It's always fun when we have extra folks on the show, because that dynamic, it's an interesting dynamic that it always brings, especially when it's a husband and wife team. And now I think that's an interesting piece, I think, and it always adds just an extra bit of it. And by the way, I didn't say this, but Dan, former member of the regiment, part of the originals, weren't you, Dan?
The Legion, fifth group.
The Legion. Oh, okay. Well, we'll still continue with the show. That's okay. And for those of you who don't know what in the world Dan and I are talking about, Google it or send me a note. Legion, they're still a bunch of good guys. We still like them. But I want to jump into this and get into what's going on with y'all. And I'm going to start with the program, the nonprofit that you've got with Advancing Warrior. And I think I just flubbed it up. I feel like I did. But Advancing the Warrior. Did I get it right the second time?
Advancing Warriors International is the full name, but we usually just Advancing Warriors, just kind of the colloquial term that we use.
So what was the catalyst? What was that got it started? I know both of y'all have dealt with some things. Was it a combined, like one night at dinner, or was it, hey, we got to start this, and oh, by the way, hey, you want to come with me?
Well, I'll just real quick. I mean, it was really Ellie starting it 3 years ago. I've only become involved in the last year or so. Went through the programs as a participant, and then beginning of this year starting working for the nonprofit. But everything prior to that was all Ellie, so I'll let her take that.
So I was in the Air Force, trained as a psychiatrist, and I sustained a traumatic brain injury, and then within a month I was raped and just had trauma after trauma after trauma, and ended up being on convalescent leave for 3 years until they decided to retire me. And so it was during that journey of going through trauma myself, after having been trained how to treat trauma, really recognizing what doesn't work and what works, and how isolated I was along that journey. And I actually have a book that just came out, Unshackled, that talks about the whole story and the nonprofit and kind of how that started. But it was really recognizing that I didn't have a group of people that could relate to my story, or that I could share what, like, the deepest hurts that I was going through. Mm-hmm. And because I was stationed in Colorado and my commander was in Dayton, Ohio, and I was attached to a ROTC unit, and I didn't really have any military members with me. I was doing a child and adolescent psychiatry fellowship in Colorado. And so it was just this isolating time, and really recognizing that I was in denial of a lot of things. I didn't recognize barriers that I was going through, and it was chipping away at those things that really helped me, and really, most of all, my faith of really holding on to God through that journey, and having Him pull me through that darkness. And so I created a program called Tribe, which kind of goes along with the podcast, just to really have that group of people who you can be yourself, you can have that community, you can have that relatability. And so I created that curriculum out of the journey that I went through, and what I learned that really helped me. And then recognizing that I needed to start a nonprofit from that, build more curriculum, build more on top of that, because one program's not enough. There needs to be more to continue to build that community. So that's kind of how it started.
How did you begin to I guess, create that better path forward? Because you talked about like what was working and what wasn't working, from your professional background. And I think that's one of the really interesting areas of like the doctor heal thyself type thing, whether it's a business coach or a consultant who like is completely blind to the problems inside their own business. Or I always think about it in all the behavioral scientists that I read their books, and then they're talking about how to change your behavior for the better, but then they're full blown alcoholics. Like there's always those kind of, incongruities, it seems like, with doctors in those different areas. So how were you able to step past that and, make that better path forward?
It's really difficult, especially for physicians, because you're trained in an environment where you can't allow any vulnerabilities or flaws to show, or you're going to get reamed for it. I mean, a lot of pride the Army deals with too. And so you just really, it's all about performance, and it's all about putting this front. And so I really, when I had those traumas, I was stripped. Like I had nothing to offer. I couldn't perform. I couldn't achieve. I actually couldn't read for 2.5 years without getting severe migraines. So I couldn't work. And so it was that time where I basically could do nothing but just kind of sit, think, and pray and listen to the Bible on the Bible app. And it was during that time where I actually was faced with my own flaws, my own mistakes, and what I was actually dealing with. And it took about 2.5 years, and you talk about a psychiatrist not really having self-awareness. It's 2.5 years before I was diagnosed with PTSD. And wow. I was completely unaware of it. I blamed everything on my traumatic brain injury. And so a lot of it was just really breaking through that denial and developing a better self-awareness. But I was gifted with time and space to do that because I didn't have the distractions that a lot of people have, looking at Facebook, Instagram, doing all these activities. Like I couldn't really do anything. And so it was almost this forced sense of rest and really being able to have the time to process. So that was probably the biggest thing that really helped me identify, okay, these are actually really big issues going on. You've got to deal with them now, or you're never going to get back to work.
What was it that I guess caused the threshold? Maybe it's not threshold, because that's very traumatic, right? And not to even get into the events, but just having to deal with it and come to terms with it yourself, but then being able to flip it into sharing with others, and not only sharing but teaching. Where does that element? What's the genesis of that element, if you will, that says, I got to do something with this?
There's certain things, like if you think of beauty in this world, awesome song that people like, something that is so beautiful or so amazing, you just have to share it. And that's what happened to me, where I grew up believing that I followed Jesus from early on. And it always was this sense of performance or trying to prove my worth, even though, and we can talk about consistency with leadership later, but even though my faith and my actions were consistent. So I believe that Jesus died for me, forgave all my sins, and I just accepted that as a free gift. Done. Have eternal life. But I was trying to prove my worth, trying to continue to prove my worth to myself, to God, to others. When I had the traumas, it was this huge breakthrough. Not immediately. It took a while for me because I'm very stubborn. But it was this huge breakthrough to recognize, wow, I don't have to prove my worth. God already proved it on the cross. And that I have nothing, my identity is in how much he loves me and how much he cares for me. And it's not, I don't have to block his love with my performance or trying to prove. And that's what I was doing. I was blocking his forgiveness, blocking his grace, because I'm like, no, I can do this. Let me do this. I want to prove that I can do this. And I didn't realize I was doing that. And so the moment that I recognized it, the moment that I recognized that I was chasing all of these achievements and these goals in order to prove my worth, and I recognize that all of those things come up empty. And even if I achieved them all, I would still be empty trying to prove my worth. And once I realized that and I let that go, I actually experienced a joy and a peace I'd never felt before, and a freedom. And so it was just, I felt like I went from the life of a slave driver to a life of a slave set free. And I really feel like that message needs to be heard and needs to be continue to be perpetuated so that people can find that freedom. And especially veterans and first responders who have that mentality of performance and have that desire to prove their worth. And it's perpetuated by the culture. And just really recognizing that it's needed, and I have insight and wisdom, and I've been through a lot of trauma and found kind of a key to unlock it. And so I have to share it.
I'm gonna jump onto Dan's side here, just because I hear something, and based on my life growing up in that same area that Dan did, is that desire to perform, that desire for the next level. That's what pulled us into the regiment, into being a Green Beret, right? You don't just kind of wander into it or stumble across it. You got to have that desire to do more. So I'm real curious, Dan, when you heard that, and even just now hearing it again, what does that do to your mindset of from our training with the regiment and all those sort of things? How does that sit? How did that sit with you the first time that you probably heard Ellie explaining that, hey, you don't have to prove your worth by doing that?
Yeah, and I'll be honest, it's something that probably everybody, no matter what you believe, and how much faith you have in something, right? Like it's at a certain point, most people are going to feel as if the results are up to us. And I'll admit, I have plenty of days where I'm like, man, I got to do this. 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 And so it's I would say an ongoing area of growth for me. But when I really take a step back, it's really cool because we're entrusted with, let's put it this way, Jesus didn't stick around walking around on earth, a real long time after he rose from the dead. He entrusted, sharing the gospel, sharing, the good news, and his story with flawed people, right? Gives us all the tools to do that job, gives us the task, trusts us to do that task. But at the end of the day, the Bible also tells us that, those results aren't up to us. We just need to go out and do the work, right? And go out and share the word. And, again, that's a hard thing to do, to just relinquish control of the results. It's by no means an easy thing to do. But when you really think of it in that terms, at least for me, it's pretty encouraging, because it's like, well, as long as I'm going into this with the right motivation, and putting in the effort of what I am able to do, the results are going to fall into place. Maybe I won't see it, which again is a hard thing for me personally to do. I'm very much a quantitative analytics kind of guy. So it's like, hey, let's measure before, measure after, solve for that delta in between, and that's not necessarily something that always works out here. So I guess to answer your question, one thing that's been a really good growth thing for me is the appreciation for qualitative analytics, like seeing qualitative, subjective growth in myself and others. Ellie and I haven't really known each other too terribly long. We haven't been married that long, but just seeing how far we've just kind of come as a couple, it's exponential growth, right? And it's beyond anything that we can do by ourselves. So there's obviously something else at play. I think, I also believe, we were each gifted and given certain skills and abilities, and some people just have that go drive, and it's just a matter of finding, I think, what's that purpose you were meant to apply that drive towards, right? So I don't necessarily see the two things as mutually exclusive. It's just, I guess you could say, like, using the right tools for the job, so to speak, right? Like using your skills to do, using the tool that you have to do the right job, I guess, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. I love that approach to it, and especially using our buzzword, of course, of purpose. That's the way I really think about it. Is you have your skill set, you have your purpose that you can apply that skill set to, and then it's really your duty to apply that as best you can. And I think the interesting thing there, talking about that pressure to perform, becomes striking that balance between performance and, I can't even think of what the opposite would be. I mean, Ellie, maybe you have a good word for it, because since you were the one setting this conversation up. But, the opposite of performance. Resting is what comes to mind, but that's not really right. More reflection, I guess. Yeah. And then, but what I always think of is that the pressure to perform and a desire to perform, it comes out of necessity. And I think that's one thing that people try to block out too much when they go through this, whether it's a conversation with a friend or they're going through the journey themselves, that there is the desire to perform, the desire to do things isn't inherently bad. It's more recognizing what's inside your control and what's not, and recognizing when you need to perform versus when you really don't. And my favorite example of this is out on the rugby field when I'm coaching. It's always like, the 2 hours we're out there, I don't care how wrong I am, we are moving forward for 2 hours. And then we could talk afterwards about how wrong I was or how stupid that drill was. Didn't make any sense. Didn't even have a rugby ball. Like, whatever it is, like, it doesn't matter. But for that 2 hours, we have to move forward. And then we could stop, we can reflect, and we can make better for the next practice or the next game or whatever it is. But it's that recognition that things will continue to move forward, and you have to move. There's sometimes you do have to move forward, but then there's also when you can instill the stillness inside of your life, so that you can have more of that reflection. It creates that balance, which I think is really key there. When you talk about relinquishing the control of the results, where do you transfer that control? Where do you transfer that, like, mechanism that you're focusing on, where you're putting your energy to? If it's no longer at the results, where do you put that?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is we leave the results up to God, right? Like, we can't stop. His will is going to play out, right, one way or another. We each have a role to play, right? We've got I'm trying to think of the word, like a path to follow, right?
Right.
And we have a choice whether or not we're going to follow that path. Say we're supposed to go right and we go left, right? Like we believe that God's will is going to play out regardless. Someone else might step in, right? Mm-hmm. So it's I guess just relinquishing the results in that sense that, like, you know what, like, it might still be super frustrating, right? And I go through this, I don't want to say all the time, but it's not uncommon for me to just put a lot of effort into something and not see a result and get frustrated about it. Mm-hmm. Like, hey, what the heck is going on? And I think that's probably natural. It's instinctual. It's normal. I think it's not a bad thing to want to see results, but I think it's that's we talk about it in some of our programs. It's like the danger is when you take a good thing and make it an ultimate thing, right? Results are a great thing; they're a good thing. But if I take it so far as to say that, well, I have to be the one that witnesses and sees those results, I've just kind of made it an ultimate thing. It basically becomes an obsession, right? Mm-hmm. And it's not an easy thing to do, to just pour all your time, your effort, your heart and soul, so to speak, into something, and then, I'm not necessarily seeing this play out the way I expected it to, but it's okay. Like, that's not an easy thing to do, and I think it's something that Ellie and I are both growing with right now. There's certain things that I think we can affect. I'll say affect, maybe not control, but we can affect the results. But there's a lot that we can't. So it's kind of hard to definitively say, like, kind of how we deal with that. But the simplest way to say it is, like, we just we do our best to you know, put the effort, put the time in, but really just try to trust and have faith that the results will play out, or know that they're going to play out the way they need to, whether or not we see them.
Yeah, and I love,
me
you know, you talk about that it's you have your path and it's your job to stay on that path, because that's really the way, and we're going to get some deep philosophical here for a second, but you know, that's really the way I view, you know, call it meaning of life, call it whatever, but it's like you have your purpose, you have that path that you can follow, and if you follow it well, the better you follow it, the more people you can affect along the way. And it's all about, you know, finding your way to that success, to that happiness, whatever you want to call it, and then figuring out how you can help other people along that way. And I think the really interesting thing here, you talking about results, reminds me of a conversation we had on the podcast a few weeks ago, talking about money. And money inside of the business, how like money is the most important thing. Like I studied economics because money is the thing that makes the world go around in so many different ways. But when you worry about money, your results are terrible. Like when you worry about money, when you take it from, as you put it, Dan, the good to the ultimate, it creates these really negative results and these negative behaviors. And I think that's a really important thing to recognize, that you can have something that is as insanely important as money keeping the lights on inside of your business. But if you spend your time focusing on that rather than focusing on your, you know, affecting that change in the world, then you're going to be setting yourself up for failure over and over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, something like that, when you take a good thing and make it an ultimate thing, the ends always justify the means, no matter how bad or immoral or damaging those means are, right? Like if we take something and we make it the object, our focus of the result, whatever it is, money, success, having, you know, a lot of popularity, whatever it is, right? Like not necessarily bad things, but if we then take that and elevate it to the ultimate thing, like it's whatever it takes to achieve that, no matter how many, you know, burned out corpses I got to leave in my wake, right? Like and I'm not saying it necessarily always plays out that way, but it's kind of risky. It's tenuous, right? Focusing on the end product. And again, like trust me, I probably annoy Ellie all the time because I'm very much a destination type person, less the journey. Like I want to know where we're going. I want to know when we're going to get there, how we're going to get. Like I want to get there and get this thing figured out so we can move on to the next thing. And a lot of times I'll overlook the process and the journey, right? Well, that process, especially when people are involved in leadership and things like that, like that's everything. When you do that right, then you'll get to the destination or the result that you want.
Yeah, I love that. And I think it's, you know, there's this funny dichotomy that always comes up where it's like, is it the journey or the destination? You know, is it about money or is it about impact? And it's always about all of these things. They're always interrelated, and you got to be able to find the nuance inside of those. One thing, and kind of shifting gears a little bit on this, that I was curious about, you know, we talk about, and Ellie, this is for you with more of the, not our man logic of how feelings and stuff work, but more throwing it over to you. We talked some about like that desire to perform, the pressure to perform, and how important it is that, you know, sometimes you do need to perform. You know, sometimes somebody hurts your feelings and you shouldn't tell them now. You can go, like I said in my rugby example, go coach for 2 more hours, talk to them afterwards. Where do you think that happy medium lies of bottle things up to, you know, be realistic and actionable, but then at the same time not letting it bottle up forever until it, you know, explodes?
Right. I think the importance is recognizing how much of the performance is actually identity. And so when performance is identity and you fail, that completely destroys people and crushes people. When performance, you know, if I saw my identity as an officer in the Air Force and then I got retired, that would crush me because that's all I had. And now I have to find another identity. Now I have to find another purpose. And so if identity is purpose and performance is identity and purpose, and you're not performing to standards, you're not exceeding expectations, you're not, whatever the line is that you measure, okay, I'm good enough, which I would argue most people never get there to where they actually think they're good enough, unless they're narcissists. But just really recognizing that how much and like having an ultimate thing? How much is performance and achieving a goal an ultimate thing in my life? I need to work hard. I need to perform. But if performance is the ultimate thing in my life, it's going to destroy me. It's going to destroy everyone I love. It's going to destroy everyone in the process.
I love your use of the word identity on that, because what it makes me think too. Sorry if I'm going back to rugby too much on this. Every now and then that happens, but and whether it's rugby or another sport, when you get into the strategy of the game, sometimes you'll get a team where it's like we have this identity. For example, this Saturday we played a rugby team from Utah. Their identity was they play smash mouth. They want to hit you in the mouth over and over and over again. And what I talked to my players about before the game was that when you have somebody with an identity like that, if you can remove that from them, they fall apart. And that's the exact same thing you're talking about, is if your identity is your performance, then that's something that's outside of your control, which means that somebody else can mess it up for you, or life can mess it up for you, put it broadly. And when that happens, you lose your identity and you can't go back to it. And I think it's, in the sport example, it's the difference of having a winning team whose identity is winning versus a winning team whose identity is hard work. And I think that's really what we're kind of getting to as, we talk about results versus control. Is results are the thing that are very often outside of your control. But then on the other end of the spectrum, the hard work is inside of your control. And if you continue to put that in and you value that instead, then you do get better results in the long run, as weird as that is.
Yeah. It's that saying, trust the process, right? It's super cliche, right? But it's like it works.
Exactly. So one other thing on that, how have you taken all of this knowledge? Because we've talked through, we haven't been going about 25 minutes now, but we've talked through a lot of really big, really deep stuff here. How have you been able to take this and push, I almost said bottle it up and sell it, but we're talking about not bottling things up, so that's the wrong phrase. But how you've been able to take this and make it into something that's actionable for other people? Because a lot of philosophy is internal in a lot of ways. And so being able to find these things for yourself and then, sharing it with your husband, that's one thing. But then sharing it with somebody else who now you're even further removed from that person, and then, going further and further down that line, that's a really difficult thing because it is such a personal, deep philosophical type of process to go through. So how have you approached that from kind of the business standpoint?
With psychiatry as my business, it's really being able to empathize with people and being able to help them see that they're in a safe space, they're not being judged, and they can actually process through things that they've been going through, or they actually have a space to do that. Within the nonprofit world, it's a little harder for veterans and first responders to go through that kind of process, but going first as a leader and really being vulnerable and saying, hey, this is what happened with me, this is what I've been through, the good, the bad, the ugly, it really empowers people to go next and really work through their stuff. And then as other people in the groups go second, third, fourth, people really open up and amazing things happen to where they actually have had Vietnam veterans share stories from 40 plus years ago when they'd never shared it with a soul before and really experience freedom. And so and people see that the power in that, of sharing their story and being themselves and not having to fake it till you make it. And that really changes people and really being able to wrestle with misconceptions about who God is, who they are, identity, purpose. I really struggled with that and really sharing my struggles of, can God be trusted? Can I be trusted? Can people be trusted? And really being able to wrestle with that and empowering other people to wrestle with those same things really helps open people's eyes and find freedom in that respect too.
When you talk about trust, and by the way, yes, I'm back, folks. Sorry for the technical difficulties. I won't call out the office building that I'm in right now because I don't want to throw them under the bus.
Call out Baltimore. That's broad enough.
Yeah. I'm going to trust the process, right?
There you go.
And really, what I'm wondering about, the big word trust, because I was doing some research the other day with the Gartner group, and that's one of the things that they talk about in that community. How do you establish that when you're going through this educational process with the participants? How do you establish that trust with you? And I'm envisioning the podium speak, but I doubt very seriously that you're doing it that way. But however you're presenting it to the participants, I'm using some really odd terms because I don't want to label anything. So I'll throw that to you and stop rambling.
Yeah, no, I mean, we use the term participants and then facilitators for the group leaders. Like Ellie was talking about, I mean, it's relatability. I would say is the first piece. So especially in the veteran, military, first responder world, just knowing the secret handshake kind of thing goes a long way. And then for our programs and groups, all the facilitators, are peer facilitators. These aren't, just a volunteer from the community who really likes the program, wants to give back. We've certainly got opportunities for people to volunteer and help out, but when it comes down to actually running the groups, it's all peer facilitator led. So, for example, I came through as a participant in each program, then I become, get trained as a facilitator, and then go on. So you've got a little bit of that, those credentials as well. But one thing that we are extremely firm about, well, there's a couple of things. We also have participants sign non-disclosure agreements. We have a lot of law enforcement, sometimes active duty military, so security clearances, things like that. Like there are things where it's like having another layer of confidentiality is really important. So we have that. But then the other point I was trying to make, the thing that we are ultra firm about is, and this is backed up in the Bible and Scripture, is that there's just no condemnation. Like, we are not going to judge people. The only things that we would ever need to report is like if someone's going to hurt themselves or somebody else, right? Like those are the only things that would ever, leave the trust tree, so to speak. What we find is if you take all those things and then as a peer leader, peer facilitator, you're willing to be open and transparent and like, hey, here's my dirty laundry. This is what I've done, right? This is bad, right? You go there first, like, yeah, it's hard to explain how powerful that is, but you'll just see people's walls just come down and boom, they open up. And then every once in a while, we'll have a participant going through the program who just, that's their personality, they're a sharer, and they go first, and it's like, well, all right, they went there, we're going to go there too, and so it's like dominoes. Once one person goes, it just kind of starts to fall into place. And again, that's one of those things that's like impossible to quantify. So going back to results, like you can't. I mean, I guess you could say like how many participants shared, like over how many groups. Like, okay, that's not that meaningful. You really can't assign a number to that. Mm-hmm. To that relatability, to that trust, right? That's that subjective, qualitative type of stuff, but it's really cool to. So it's hard to explain, but it's really cool to see, see that transformation and that process kind of take place. But it really just, I guess the easiest way to say it is just, hey, we're all real people, and we've all got stuff, and like let's just talk about it. And I'm not going to judge you; you're not going to judge me, and that goes a long way for people to build trust quickly.
Yeah, I agree with you. I've not in the trauma sense, but in some other aspects of folks just sharing mistakes. It's amazing what that can do to establishing the trust in the group. I want to shift gears and talk a little bit about the business side of it because, what I've found over the years in working with various nonprofits is most of them figure all they have to do is give, and not realize there has to be a sustainment aspect of it.
Yeah.
And so what I'd love to know is how have you, and it's particularly, I think it's you, Dan, that's doing this. How have you shifted into how do we sustain this thing, because we're helping people, and oh, by the way, it takes money to continue to be able to do this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot. Got to put hay in the barn, right? But you know, one of the things that we're starting to see some progress with is, you know, certainly there's a large relational aspect, especially when we're talking foundations, funders, donors, things like that. Right? You know, just really building relationship. That's not unique to nonprofits, right? I think doing that, it kind of makes me think back to the Army days, like different lines of effort, right? When I think like funding and development, our development program, we've got that really, call it more hands-on, longer, I don't want to say longer-term approach, but at the same time, there's also volume. So just getting communication out to potential funders, to potential grants, things like that, just making sure that you've always got communication out to go, or materials out to make communication with potential funders. Where, you know, that all sounds well and good, right? But if you think about what you have to do before you do that, is you've got to have your plan dialed tight, right? Say we have a project or a program that's going to be $100,000 that we need to fund. Well, most likely we're not going to find a single funder that is going to, you know, drop a $100,000 check. I mean, that'd be great, it'd be awesome. We've had some really generous funders and donors even this year, but that doesn't always happen, right? You know, there might be a couple thousand or 10,000, something like that, and you know, it's not so much ROI, but we need to make sure we know how every penny will be spent from every donation that we get, right, towards a particular project. So, say we get $1,000 donation, you know, it's 1/100th of our need. Well, to be able to communicate the impact of that 1% is really important. Not only to be a good steward of that money that's given to us, but we want to communicate and be able to articulate and share the impact to the donor, so they know just what they're able to achieve with that, you know, that generous donation. And then, you know, that's also, when it comes back to results, like that keeps you from focusing on like, I'm not going to be able to define success until I have this $100,000 project done and finished, and then seeing how well it's doing, right? It gives me the ability to have that, to look at that incremental progress. Like, hey, we just got, you know, 10% of our donations. Cool, that's a great quantifiable metric. But what's the qualitative metric, the subjective impact that we've been able to achieve with that thus far? Because typically we're not going to wait until we have, I mean, it depends on the project. We're not going to necessarily wait until we have everything funded to be offering different services. Certain things we'd have to, because if we're going to procure something, but you know, most of our programs, we don't need to have our full amount before we can start work, right? So if you just kind of keep that perspective of like, okay, we can have incremental progress when it comes to funding, when it comes to development, like you can quantify that result, but then you can really qualify the results as well, which is really important. Again, for me, just personally, with the way my personality's been, if I didn't focus on that, I would I'd be like, we're only 10% of the way there. We're never going to get there. We can't get to our destination. So it, you know, I think it helps for all those reasons that I mentioned. Like it helps a lot to have that approach, but then also like it just helps you keep your sanity, right? Because it's a long road. Like the development process in the nonprofit world, or any business seeking funding. I mean, that's hard work, right? And it takes a long time. And if you don't have incremental progress that you can see, I mean, you might lose your mind. So that's been a really good learning experience for me. Like, one, just it's a totally different world, different terminology. Certain grants want things a certain way, right? Like, so just figuring out like the process has been really interesting. But then it's also given me a really solid appreciation for the importance of having a way to evaluate incremental progress and things like that.
That's what you hit on.
I'm really curious.
Favorite things. You hit on one of my favorite things about nonprofits, and that's the grant world. Because I've seen many nonprofits, to include the one I'm working with right now, the Commit Foundation, where the drift starts to happen because somebody dangles that apple out in front of you, the carrot, right? That says, "Hey, here's a grant for $100,000," and you're like, "Yes, but I want you to do this with it, and here's how I want you to do it." What do you have in place? And by the way, folks listening, this applies to businesses too, because a client will do this to you also. But what do you do, or what is your plan in that instance that somebody dangles it and it's we'll call it mission creep, because I'm sure that hits home with you, Dan.
Yeah, I was thinking mission creep, scope creep, right?
Yep.
It's gonna, you're right. It's gonna, in any circumstance, right, or any situation, excuse me, it's gonna come up. I think for us, if that were to happen, where someone shows up with a big check and there's strings, there's gonna be strings attached to it, right? Like whether that be communication, whatever, right? And that's fine. I think for us especially, having an extremely firm and clear mission and vision on like what we're trying to achieve and how we'll go about trying to achieve that, that's what we'll fall back on. Certainly we can be flexible. We don't think that we necessarily have the perfect answer and the perfect delivery model for everything. If a funder came in, with hey, here's some money for an outreach and marketing budget, right? But we think you need to do things this way. Okay, I'm willing to listen. If somebody is going to come in and say, hey, here's a bunch of money for general operating expenditures, but you need to kind of tone it back on the faith side of things. Hey, thank you for the offer. We really appreciate you reaching out, but we're not willing to do that, right? And that's where that firm mission and vision comes in. And then, for our nonprofit, it is, focused towards veterans first responders, and it's firmly based in biblical principles, and most importantly, a clear presentation, clear communication of the gospel. We won't deviate from that. But as long as we're not being, someone's trying to entice or lure us away from deviating from that mission, okay, we'll have a discussion. But it's like we have a red line. And so I think it's important for any organization, even just individuals, like know what your red lines are. Know at the end of the day and be able to explain in just a few sentences like what you're trying to do. And if, there's some dollars attached to something that's not in line with that, it should at least, make you scratch your head a little bit and make you think about it.
Kind of shifting a little bit, but in the same area on that. What I'm curious about is, does the financial, like the business side of it, does it hurt your vision of the mission at all? And what I mean by that is, like, out there trying to get the grants and everything, trying to raise the money, does that get you almost like jaded around like, come on, we're just trying to help people and I have to go raise money for this? Like, does it kind of weigh on you in that type of a way at all?
So sometimes it's, I think I would love if I could just if we could just sit at our desk and write a cool curriculum. Right, but like I said before, hay's got to be put in the barn. I think it can get the funding, seeking development, seeking that type. It can get tough. It can be fatiguing for sure. I've personally felt it. I had days where, I'm maybe not so cheery about it, if I'm being honest. But, I think for Ellie and I, and why we feel so strongly about our faith is that we can, again, go back to the results. At the end of the day, it may not be an easy thing for me to do, but I can relinquish that result to God. And it's going to happen in the way that it needs to happen. Maybe not in the way that I'm envisioning it or I want it to happen, but it's going to play out the way it needs to. I don't know, maybe for some people that sounds a little weird, right? But I really think that that's a really important thing, especially for us, because, with the nature of our nonprofit, I mean, yes, the reality is things that are faith-based, that sometimes that does shut off funding opportunities, because certain organizations need to stay more agnostic or stay more general. And, hey, that's okay, right? Like every organization has their purpose and their function. It goes back to their mission, their vision, what they're trying to do. If we're just not a fit, okay, it's nothing against them, nothing against us. We just are different. We have a different approach. And, again, for us, it really comes down to putting in the work, trying to find those connections, find that funding, but at the end of the day, not letting that work and that need get from a good thing right to that ultimate thing where it becomes an obsession. And again, I say this as if it's an easy thing. It's not. It's tough, right? It takes a lot of work and a lot of intentionality. But at the end of the day, we know that we aren't alone in this, and it's not solely sitting on our shoulders. Even though I might say that I feel like it's sitting on my shoulders all the time, but it's not, right? If I'm being honest, and so it's really trying to keep perspective on the difference between fact versus feeling, right? And again, for someone who likes to think of himself as a pretty objective, quantitative guy, I feel like I give into the feeling side of things too often. So, but yeah, so it's keeping that perspective.
A little touchy-feely on me.
A little, just a touch bit.
I think you dropped out during the touchy-feelies earlier.
I'm a psychiatrist, so a little more touchy-feely now.
Well, let me just say, this has been great, and my what did I learn is a pretty obvious and easy one. Is just because you're in a fancy office building does not mean that the guest Wi-Fi that they have set up in the office building is reliable. I'm very disappointed, and if I could complain to somebody that I knew would care, I might, but I don't think I'm going to, because I am a guest, and I guess I can't complain too much. So for me, that's the very obvious. What did I learn is don't always trust those little bars and things. I probably would have been better off at the coffee shop around the corner. So, Camden, how about you? What did you learn?
We're really running this new recording platform through the ringer on this one, and that's good. What I learned is, we talked a lot about performance as identity, and I shared, my story of how I've recognized that inside of sports and how important that is from a strategy stance. But you can apply that strategy so much to your own life that if performance is your identity, then as soon as your performance isn't what it used to be, you're going to lose that identity. And that opens you up to all sorts of negative patterns and, negative self-belief and all these different types of issues. So it's really important that you tie your identity to we didn't go through many other options. I'm sure there's other options, but the hard work is the one we kept talking about. I'm sure there's other good places to put your identity into, but putting your identity as that hard work rather than the performance, and then just trusting that the performance will come with the hard work. So that's what I learned.
Yeah.
Ellie, how about you? What did you learn? You don't get to go, Dan. You have to go last, man. Just hold up.
I think learning, a lot of people think, okay, well, if I don't have to perform, that means I'm just giving up. And there's a huge importance in reflection, because if you don't reflect, you're not going to know where your flaws or the kinks are in your armor. And so it's really recognizing I need to take time to reflect and say, okay, how well did I do this? What are things I need to work on? And without that reflection time, you're just going to kind of keep doing the same thing, making the same mistakes.
Yeah,
awesome.
and I was going
All
to
right,
say,
Dan, you get to go. You get to go now.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I'm not just copying Ellie, but it was something on the reflection side of things. But anyway, I liked Cam, your image of, hey, I've got a rugby practice. Maybe I'm not going to be perfectly right for that two hour block, but you know what? We're going to continue doing what we're doing. We're going to do the best that we can, and then to Ellie's point, we're going to reflect afterwards of what we're going to learn.
Yeah.
Right? I think there's a lot of really important wisdom there. Certainly we don't want to get in, commit to a bad position on something and like, you know what, no matter what, this is a terrible idea, but I'm going to push it because I said I'm going to do it, right? Certainly we don't want to do that, but most days, weeks, whatever, there's going to be a lot of ambiguity. It's like, hey, let's get through this. Let's get through this next sprint, right? And use the software development term, right? Let's just get through this next sprint. And we'll reevaluate, right? But giving yourself the flexibility to reassess and route if you need to. But I think it is super important, like Ellie said, that reflection piece afterwards. Hey, see what went well, what didn't, and what can we do better in the future.
Awesome. Well, how do folks learn more about Advancing Warriors International first? Because I want to really talk about give a shout out to the book in a second. So where do we find more about that? How do we sign up for the next iteration, the next course? Yeah.
So advancingwarriors.org is our website. So we've got a good amount of information there. And actually it's really exciting. We're doing the final user acceptance testing right now, but it is live. A couple little bugs, but getting those fixed. But we have a mobile app that's out in the App Store and Google Play Store. You have to search it under Advancing Warriors. We don't have a lot of the other search metadata built into it yet, so that's the only way it'll show up. But it's a really good resource that connects you to a lot of the information that's on our website. If it's not on the app, it can redirect you to the website. But the vision for that is to be just what you're saying, Otis. Like where do we go to sign up, right? So there'll be an events calendar to get plugged into groups. You can sign up for different push notifications for whether it be events or an article that Ellie writes or social media, like just a kind of a digital community kind of thing. Like not quite reinventing the wheel on social media stuff, but having some of those links. So those are two resources that folks can go to. And then I would say if anybody's listening here that's local to the greater Denver area, we would certainly recommend the church that we go to. We're there, I say pretty much every week unless we're out of town or something like that. So, we're happy to talk with folks. But if folks are just looking for a church or a community to get plugged in, recommend folks just swing by if they're available. And that's Grace Church in Arvada. It's 6969 Sheridan. So, but even if it's none of those things, we would encourage people that if any of the stuff that Ellie and I said made sense, try to get plugged into a local church, local community. A lot of good things can happen, whether it's with us or another organization.
That's great. Now, Ellie, tell us where we can find the book. What's going on with Unshackled? Is it fully out? What's up?
Yeah, so Unshackled, Finding God's Freedom from Trauma. It's about my story, so kind of the good, the bad, the ugly, what happened with me, how I found my way out of the pit. And then I have a lot of different stories of other veterans, first responders, civilians, their stories of trauma and how they found their way out. So just practical ways and really being able to, whether it's preventative, whether you have a loved one who's suffering, or whether you've gone through trauma yourself, just really gaining more knowledge. So it's from a personal perspective as well as clinical. And you can get it on my website. It's drelizabethstevens.com, and Stevens with a V. And then And then you can get it on Amazon, Barnes & Noble, all the retail booksellers. You can get them there too. So.
And
Well, congratulations on that.
She might have narrated the audiobook. So.
And he narrated the male part. So,
Like 2 sentences. It was mostly
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome. Congratulations on that.
Thank you.
Thank you all so much for your time today, and really enjoyed having y'all share with us.
Thanks so much for having us.
This is awesome.
Yeah, this is great.
Thanks, guys.
All right, Camden, run us out.
All right. Thank you all for listening to the Cam and Otis Show, and a special thanks to our guest, Dan Strathman and Ellie Stevens, for joining us today. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to pass it along. Follow the Cam and Otis Show on Facebook and Instagram. Full videos of our show are available on our YouTube page, and the full archive of our episodes is available at www.camandotishow.com. Thanks again, and we'll see y'all next time.